Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Downforce radio series, 15 minutes on ... And this time around, we are reacting to the news that after just 12 Grand Prix, Alex Albon will be replacing Pierre Gasly at the Red Bull Formula 1 team. Reacting with me today is our very own head honcho, Jake Sanson. And Jake, can you just start by giving us your initial reaction to this news?
Wow. It's an initial reaction. I genuinely didn't see that one coming. For Alex Albon, it's fantastic. It proves that he's got the ability to come up to one of the big three teams in Formula One, and he's been given a shot. For Gasly, it's demoralising, and he's been betrayed by his own team, who have said for the last few weeks, well, we're definitely going to stick with him for the rest of the year. And that proved to be a hogwash of lies. For Daniel Kvyat, it's a stab in the back. He got a podium for them 2 races ago, and that clearly means nothing.
And obviously, you've mentioned Daniel Kvyat there. He got the podium. He's probably been on a level with Albon this year, I think it would be fair to say, except for that one freak result, which I think there were a lot of surprises there. Is it so much of a kick in the teeth for Kvyat, or is it something that we always really knew was going to be the case, that he was just the backup?
I think it's confirmation that Daniel Kvyat is never really going to be given another opportunity in the senior team for Red Bull. This was the golden opportunity to prove it. They have said that they want to test out Alex Albon for 2020 to see who should be teammate to Max. Clearly, Daniel Kvyat has the experience to be his teammate, but I think there's potentially a little bit of bad blood we don't know about from when Kvyat was last demoted in favour of Max Verstappen. Perhaps that's got something to do with it. It is a very strange scenario that Kvyat, despite having a podium, is not going to be given the seat, whereas Alex Albon is. That's not to take away from Alex Albon's ability. He deserves a chance. But for Kvyat, this is kind of why he came back to Red Bull. He wanted to have another crack at Formula One, not to be, the Toro Rosso donkey boy, essentially. He's basically now the test mule. For Pierre Gasly, it's demoralising as well because, he was given the shot, perhaps some might say a bit too early, but they clearly now don't have an intention to stick with him for the rest of the year. So it causes a massive upset within the Red Bull stable for many reasons.
Where do you see Pierre Gasly going from this? Because we've seen Kvyat, when he got demoted, he left the championship and he went and worked a reserve driver for Ferrari. He was never going to get a race seat there, but he went and worked with them. Is Gasly going to be kept on at Toro Rosso for next year, or is he now completely up in the air? Could he end up out without a drive for next year?
I think this is entirely dependent on what Alex Albon does for the rest of the season with Red Bull. He's got to take this opportunity with both hands and prove that he can be fairly close to Max Verstappen. They're trying to assess 2 drivers who can really push for the Constructors' Championship. If the car is going to be as good at Red Bull as they hope it will be next year, Verstappen will be competing for the driver's title, and they need a strong, solid number 2 who can bag in some more points to go for the Constructors' Championship. That's what they're trying to assess. For Pierre Gasly, this is a massive hammer blow. Yes, he was given the Red Bull drive because Daniel Ricciardo left the team last year, and basically they had to promote him. There was nobody else really who was in the hot seat to go for it. But the tricky nature now is that Pierre Gasly will feel he's been betrayed, will feel he's been lied to. This is not just about whether he gets the chance of another drive at Red Bull. This is about trust. This is a massive betrayal of trust. In the media, it's been stated, no, we will stick with him all through the year. And they've gone back on it. They've completely U-turned. So now, if I were Pierre Gasly, I'd be on the phone to Haas. I'd try and convince them, that he needs to be teammate to Kevin Magnussen and Romain Grosjean needs the boot. There's been a lot of discussion about whether Romain Grosjean can keep his drive at Haas. If I were Pierre Gasly, I'd be trying to get that seat before Belgium and, never mind about the Toro Rosso seat.
And is there actually, this might be a bit of a harsh question really, but is there actually any point in classing Toro Rosso as the junior team to Red Bull anymore? Because you look at the successful promotions and there's only Verstappen, Daniel Ricciardo and Sebastian Vettel. The jury's still out on Daniel Kvyat since he came back, but I mean, there's only been 3 successful transitions into that team.
I think it's still fairly reasonable to call it the junior Red Bull team because the amount of driving talents that have come through there, yes, not a lot of them have successfully promoted to the senior team, as you say, but there have been some successful promotions. You've got to look at Carlos Sainz, who has now transitioned to a major force. Daniel Ricciardo is now the works lead driver for the Renault team, Sebastian Vettel with Ferrari. They have all come through Toro Rosso. So it is still the Red Bull Junior wing, and it's always going to be. But what I think everybody now really understands, I mean, there was a reasonable argument to it now, but this promotion of Alex Albon over Daniel Kvyat really does demonstrate just how cutthroat the Red Bull program is. It's a double-edged sword, and as a few people have mentioned in the press, this could end up being a bit of a poisoned chalice. Now, for Alex, it's a great opportunity. He's under pressure to make good use of it. But, for Pierre Gasly, he's obviously been stung by it, and he now has a major threat of going the same way as Daniel Kvyat, as Jaime Alguersuari, as Jean-Eric Vergne, as Sebastian Bourdais, all these drivers who have been stung by it in the past. If I were Gasly, I'd be calling Haas. If I were Kvyat, I'd be calling Alfa Romeo, to get a seat beside Kimi Räikkönen, who he knows very well, having worked with him last year. There's a nice Ferrari connection. He obviously knows the people very well. If I were Daniel Kvyat, I think it's time to sever ties with Red Bull completely. Now, if they were both to leave, that really would scupper Red Bull again, and they would basically be dumping Red Bull in it in a very similar manner to the way that Daniel Ricciardo did last year. The only way to get their own back on Red Bull for treating them with such disrespect, in my opinion, is to seek a race seat elsewhere.
And you've mentioned Carlos Sainz there, but he never transitioned to Red Bull. They wouldn't take him. They didn't have the seat for him last year when obviously they had Ricciardo and they had Verstappen. And they chose not to promote him. They chose to give him away. And so he's ended up at McLaren. He's doing very nicely for himself, but is he one that's got away that could have fixed all of this?
Absolutely. I think getting rid of Carlos Sainz from the Red Bull program, or letting him go, is the best way to term it, is the biggest mistake Red Bull have possibly made. If they had been able to promote Carlos Sainz alongside Max Verstappen, I don't think any of this mess would have happened. They'd have happily been able to keep Gasly and potentially even Brendan Hartley again in the Toro Rosso seat for this year, because it wouldn't have rocked the boat so much. But a lot of the decisions that have come out of Red Bull in the last 12 months have come as a result of Daniel Ricciardo dropping them in it. Now, if they had decided to commit with Carlos Sainz at the right moment, he would be in the Red Bull alongside Max Verstappen. And I genuinely think both of them would have won a race so far this year. Carlos Sainz has matured incredibly in the last 12 months. His move to McLaren has been the making of him. I genuinely think now, it's going to take a while, but I think he can win races with McLaren. He can certainly score podiums with McLaren as early as next year, in my opinion. So there is a genuine opportunity lost there for Red Bull, not taking Carlos Sainz to the senior team.
Is this an example of why driver development programs don't really work? We've seen it with Mercedes, where they've had too many drivers for the seats, most notably Esteban Ocon not having a seat this year. Is this just yet another demonstration of teams stockpiling drivers that they're never going to have enough seats to fill?
It's a good argument, because the only driver program really that has actually bore fruit in that sense has been McLaren, with Lewis Hamilton coming up through the junior ranks and getting into Formula One in 2007. It's really the only major success story that hasn't been clouded in controversy and a bit of a mess. I mean, okay, you can argue that Sebastian Vettel with Red Bull and Robert Kubica with BMW are also good examples of how it can work. But there are plenty of examples of how it hasn't. You've got to look at the Ferrari development driver program. They have barely brought a single driver into Formula One through their development program. The Red Bull one is tainted in controversy and shock betrayals of trust. And the McLaren driver program is only just now getting back on its feet again with Lando Norris. So there is a bit of an argument. I think it very much depends on who runs those programs. It's clear to me that Helmut Marko has more sway in what happens in the Red Bull Formula One team than team principal Christian Horner does. Because Christian has been saying for months, we'll keep with him, we'll stick with him, we'll stick with him. And as soon as Helmut Marko's decided he's done, he's done. And that's really interesting when a team principal doesn't have ultimate control over his race team.
You mentioning Christian Horner there, could this be the end of Christian Horner's relationship with Red Bull? Could he, I don't know what his contract situation is, I don't think that's public knowledge, but could this be Horner now looking for work elsewhere?
Well, it has been significantly and substantially rumoured that, if Ross Brawn were to walk away from Formula One, Christian Horner might take up a job with F1. Now, that might have accelerated talks in the wake of, the lack of organisation with this particular move. So, yeah, there's all sorts of issues that could arise as a result of it. But if Christian Horner is not the boss of the team he is the boss of, then yes, it's definitely something you've got to keep an eye on.
So before we change topic slightly, who is going to be driving? Who are the 4 drivers that will be driving for Red Bull and Toro Rosso in the 2020 season? I'm not going to ask you which team they'll be driving for because I think that's probably impossible to predict. But who will be those 4 drivers?
Sense dictates that I think it should be Verstappen and Albon in the Red Bull next year, because knowing Alex Albon as I do and having watched him in motor racing over the last 8 years, I genuinely feel he's got the ability to do well with the Red Bull senior team. If he does, then they'll bank on him for next year because they've got to think of the future. Verstappen and Albon, they want to solidify the driver lineup for as many years as possible. Verstappen looks pretty much locked in. Albon can be locked in, and he's a very safe pair of hands. And politically, he's not going to rock the boat, I don't think. So it makes a lot of sense. Whether Kvyat or Gasly will remain with the team in some light for next year, I'm doubtful. Now, if the 2 of them leave, which if I were Kvyat, I'd be trying to get the Alfa Romeo drive. If I were Gasly, I'd be trying to go for Haas. If you dump Red Bull in it, then who would replace either one of them? Because in my opinion, none of their junior drivers are quite ready yet.
Well, they've not really got anyone, have they? They've got a few from... they've got a couple in GP2, but that's it, or F2, but that's it.
They've got a few options, in my opinion. They can source from outside. There's rumours surrounding Nico Hülkenberg's involvement with Renault. He might get an opportunity with Red Bull, but I doubt he'd go anywhere other than the senior team. Again, Bottas is linked with Red Bull if he doesn't get the Mercedes drive, which again would suggest that Albon would remain with Toro Rosso again. So this is a really messy situation they have. The only drivers I can think of off the top of my head that would be straight in at Toro Rosso next year would be, first of all, Nobuharu Matsushita, largely because of his connections with Honda. The engine suppliers are very keen to put a Japanese driver and a Honda-backed driver in Formula One, and he does have 4 F2 wins to his name now. So he is a solid pair of hands and could probably do a fairly reasonable job. For the second seat, you've got to look within the Red Bull program. Ultimately, I don't think they can really poach anybody else away who's ready to step up. Yuri Vips did a fantastic job in F3, but that's a big leap up. I don't think anybody's really successfully made that leap since Bottas. Patricio Award is obviously a decent candidate, and he's on their lips at the moment, but he doesn't have enough super license points yet, and he's very untested in Europe. The only other person who might spring a massive surprise on everybody in the second half of the season in F3 is Liam Lawson. He's the youngest driver on the F3 grid and a Red Bull young gun, but again, I just don't see him being ready in time for 2020. So once more, Red Bull are playing with fire here by bringing Albon in over Kvyat and dropping Gasly at all, in that they are basically stabbing their young drivers in the back in the most public manner possible.
So on a similar note, just to close this podcast with, Mercedes find themselves in quite a similar position, don't they, with Valtteri Bottas? We don't know what's going to happen with him. There's strong rumours, growing rumours, that he will be replaced in the off-season, or in the mid-season break, potentially by Esteban Ocon, with a view to that continuing into next season. Do you think that they'll ride on the back of this and try to sneak that news under the radar?
I think they might do. Yeah, absolutely. If they're going to announce it, they're going to announce it within the next couple of days, because obviously people are going to be trying to focus all of their attentions on the Red Bull scandal. But the difficulty Mercedes has, just to touch on it a little bit, is that Mercedes have an amazing driver in Valtteri Bottas, but ultimately I don't think he can be a world champion with the team. His time is not going to be very extensive past the next few seasons, and he clearly doesn't have the mentality quite to match up to Lewis Hamilton long-term over a season. He could do it in the odd race, but not for a title campaign. Esteban Ocon does have that potential, and they need to focus on the future, especially with a lot of these young talents coming up. So Mercedes has to start thinking ahead. They cannot afford to let Esteban Ocon sit on the sidelines for a second year. As far as I see it, they've only got 2 options open to them. One, they ditch Bottas and go with Ocon for next year and take a massive, massive gamble. Or 2, they've got to find a way to give Williams some cash and put Ocon in the second seat alongside George Russell for next year. They don't have another alternative. They cannot afford to let another team take Esteban Ocon away, and they certainly can't afford to waste millions of pounds of research and development on a driver who has the potential to be a Formula One world champion. It's a tough situation that Bottas now finds himself in. He's either got to go rallying or he's got to commit to a team he doesn't really want to have, he's not likely to have a decent future with. This could be the end of Valtteri Bottas's career.
And just to close then, in one word, who will be in Mercedes next year? Will it be Bottas, Russell, or Ocon?
Ocon.
And on that note, we are going to end this 15 minutes on the Red Bull driver merry-go-round. Thank you for joining me, Jake, and we will see you again next week. Thank you for listening.